Okay. Welcome, everyone. We're going to take just a minute to make sure everybody gets in. Eddie, it looks like I don't have the option to do a chat to everyone as opposed to just the hosts and panelists. Is that something in the setup you could check?
All right, Terry, it's fixed.
You're so good. Oh, no. Let's see if I close the chat and bring it back. Mine, Eddie, is still set up, so all I can do, I can't post in the chat to everyone. I have the choice of hosts and panelists. I have the choice of Eddie and or Patrice.
Same for me.
Which I think is going to probably mean also that people can't post into the chat. Which is not good.
Okay, now it's good.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much. So welcome, everybody. As I said, we're going to give it one more minute for people to join. We will be putting some links and stuff into the chat as we go. If you have questions specifically about the program, either now or as we go through the webinar, be sure and put those in the Q&A as opposed to the chat, and that will help us make sure we actually get to all of them instead of having to sort through the chat. In the chat, if you could all introduce yourselves, give us your name, tell us what organization you are coming from, and your land acknowledgement would be wonderful also. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and put a couple links in the chat that we'll repeat later as well. Starting with my email. If you leave with nothing else, leave with my email. Okay, so I think we will go ahead and get started because we have a lot of stuff to cover and I want to leave time for your questions at the end. The reason that we've all gathered here today is for a review of the second round of the California Veneus grant. Before we get started, let me say just one more time, introduce yourself in the chat, but keep all your questions into the Q&A. What we're going to do is I'm going to go through the presentation and then we'll do all the questions at the end. We have Patrice here from Lindustry and she may start answering some of the questions in the chat as we go, but we will go over all of them. Everyone will receive afterwards a link to a recording of the webinar. I will also go through we have the Q&A from last week's webinar and this Q&A, put it in a document and you will all receive an email of that. And also a link to the slide deck. So all of there's really great references in the slide deck. So, all right, now pretending that I have manners, let me go back to the beginning and introduce myself. My name is Terry Ball and I'm the grants manager for Californians for the Arts. And we, along with California nonprofits and NEVA California, are the partners with Lindustry and Cal OSBA administering this grant. As you may or may not know, there are lots of parties in these grant programs. This grant is open to both for-profit and nonprofits. So those of you on the nonprofit side are probably used to a pretty different structure than these Cal OSBA grants. But just briefly, a piece of legislation passes that created this grant program. In the case of this grant program, it passed. And then because there were some issues, we did a lot of advocacy and then had some cleanup language. But Cal OSBA is the state agency that is in charge of the grant. They then contract with Lindustry, which is who you will deal with, to administer the grant. And then they bring us, the three partners, in to help communicate to the field and offer technical support. This first slide, Californians for the Arts and California Arts Advocates are two organizations that work together. Californians for the Arts is the advocacy network, the communication network, and then California Arts Advocates is the actual lobbying side. And these two organizations, along with NEVA California, were the big forces that made these grants possible. So if you can go to the next, what this is reminding us all is that with all of the creative economy coming together in California, we can be a very, very powerful force. It was the combination of both the for-profit and nonprofit members of the California creative economy that helped make the Cal Veneus grant possible in the first place. So advocacy is important, and it is only effective when we all come together. The one other thing that I'd like to remind you before we dive in is the reason that organizations like this, including our friends at NEVA California, Californians for the Arts, Californians Arts Advocates, can exist is because of membership. That is how we can be here offering these services and to be your voice. So I would encourage you to go and visit the Californians for the Arts page and continue becoming members and are making a donation to the organization, because without them, we can't be here to do this. Okay, end of sales pitch. Moving on to the plan for today. What I'm going to, as I said before, please put your questions into Q&A, not into chat, because that lets me consolidate all of those in one place, and that way we can blow through all of them at the end of this and make sure we don't miss anything. If questions are over in the chat, interspersed with things like introductions, it takes a lot more time to get to them and find them. The full application guide for this grant is available at the Cal Veneus program website. Go there, download it, read it. I am not going to read you the guide line by line today because I don't think that's the best use of our time. We will cover the big highlights, but there's a lot of very useful information both in this slide deck, which includes the whole guide, and in the guide itself. So consider the webinar today as the beginning of your preparation, not the finish of your preparation for the grant. There is a lot of information to cover. I'm going to go pretty quickly. If I need to slow down, do put that into the chat. But as I say, I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time reading you information you can read on your own. I want to answer questions and give you that information. So next. Okay, a couple of important things to remember. The most important being, if you applied for the California Venues program in the first round, you are not eligible to apply for this round. Even if you applied and were rejected, or you never got a resolution, there are steps that we can take to resolve that. But if you have already submitted an application, do not apply again, because it will mess up your previous application as well. Also, just to be clear, there are a lot of grant programs going on right now. So this is specifically the California Veneus grant. The previous application period for this was in November and early December of 2021. This is not the Cal Nonprofits grant. This is not the California Relief Grant or any of the federal grants. So make sure you know which program we're talking about. If you did apply before in the first round and either were declined or you don't know what happened with your application, email me. They are trying to clear all of those up before this, as this program is going along. So if you don't know what happened or you got declined and you think under the new parameters you would be eligible, send me an email and we will continue to put my email address into the chat. Let's do that right now with my little shortcut here. There is also a phone number that will be provided at the end. It is much more effective on this to email me instead of call me. Number one, I can respond to emails in the middle of the night when I can't respond to phone calls. But the more important is it lets me process through a lot of things much faster. And also that way, when I answer your question, you have written documentation of it. So you know what to do. So that's just the most effective way to communicate with me. The application portal opened today and it will be open through January 31. It's important to remember that this grant is not reviewed on a first come, first served basis. They will wait until all the grants are received. So review will not begin until after January 31st. So there is no reason to rush today to be in the first that apply. The prioritization for these grants is based on the percentage of loss, not when the application was submitted. Next. Okay, so the program overview. This is the California Venues Grant Program. It's to support eligible independent events venues. So it's both the venue and the event producers that can potentially be eligible. There was a lot of confusion about this on the first round, that people thought it was only the venue themselves. The grant award is the lesser of $250,000 or 20% of the applicant's gross earned revenue in California for the 2019 taxable year. For the not-for-profits, that means it's your earned revenue, not your gross revenue. It's your gross earned, not your gross contributed. The prioritization is based on the decline, but it's Q2 through 4 of 2020 compared to Q2 through 4 of 2019. Because this relief is specifically about COVID, the first quarter of 2019 is not looked at because COVID hadn't hit. And so to keep, comparing apples to apples, they are then looking at those 3 quarters in both 2019 and 2020. The other thing to keep in mind is if you received a California relief grant, those started in January of 2021 and went through, and there have been multiple cycles. If you received, if you received that grant, you are still eligible for this grant, but the amount of the California relief grant will be deducted from this. So if you got a $15,000 California relief grant and you are awarded a Cal Venues grant, say for $50,000, then what you would actually receive is $35,000. They'll take out the first 15 and you would receive that 35. Okay, next. Eligible venue. So this is talking about where you perform. If you are the owner of a venue, if you run a rental venue, or you as a performance organization have your own venue. has to have a defined performance space and a defined audience space. You have to have mixing equipment, public address system, and a lighting rig. And you have to engage one or more people carrying out these roles that are listed here. So you don't have to have a staff person in each of these 6 positions. You have to have at least 2 of those 6 roles take place within your organization, or if you're an event within the organization within the venue where you perform. But it can be, as is the case in many smaller venues, one person that fulfills a couple of those roles. The other eligibility factor is that you are one of the 3 highest revenue grossing entities, locations, or franchises associated with the applicant. This particular point here is one we are still waiting for clarification from the state. As many of you know, there were changes made to the original legislation in a piece of legislation last summer. And right now, the way this is being read is that you can apply for your top 3 if you're someone who owns multiple venues that each file their own individual taxes. The way it's being interpreted right now is you can apply 3 times, for 3 different venues, but you could only receive a grant award for one of those. We're working out as to whether or not it could instead be read that you could receive for all 3. We do not have an answer at this point. We will let you know as soon as we have final clarification on that. At this writing, it would be you could only receive 1 grant, although you can apply for 3. And for a nonprofit entity, you can have free events as long as everyone that runs the event are paid employees, not volunteers. We'll go over that in a minute as we start to talk about events. Okay, next. All right, so we just talked over the venue. Whether you're the owner of the venue, that means you can apply. If you are a live performing arts organization, then you have to make sure that not only you meet the qualifications I'm about to talk about, but that your performances take place in a venue that meets those requirements that we just discussed. All right, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm going to hit the highlights. Can you go back one, Eddie? So the first is that you have to fall under one of the NAICS codes and or NTE codes that are on this list. This is one of the big changes from the original legislation. The original legislation, there were 5 NAICS codes. There are now a longer list. Go through, look at these. One of the common confusions about this is that people think I have to fall under this one. Well, what it is this has to be a NAICS code that not only accurately describes your organization, but was used on your 2019 and or 2020 taxes. Doesn't matter if you think you fit under dance companies. If your tax forms in 2019 and 2020 don't say 7-11-120, then that is not your NAICS code. If your 2019 and 2020 taxes have a NAICS code that you feel does not appropriately represent your organization, then you should talk with your accountant, tax attorney, and figure out whether or not you want to address that situation, that your taxes have the wrong NAICS code and you may want to amend your return to have them more accurately reflect. But that's a conversation for you and your accountants. But the thing to understand is, doesn't matter which one of these you think you might fit into. What matters is the only way Lindustry is allowed to verify your NAICS code is by looking at those taxes for either 2019 or 2020. Okay, let's go forward one. For nonprofits, many nonprofits do not use a NAICS code on their tax form. It is not required for all of the 990 forms. And therefore, for nonprofits, you can look at your NTEE code, and where you can go to look and verify that is on the software site GuideStar. It's just guidestar.org. You can go and look up your organization there, and it will show you your NTEE code. Again, doesn't matter what you think you fit into. What matters is what Lendistry can verify looking at GuideStar. If GuideStar has an NTE code that you feel does not appropriately represent your organization, then you should contact them and address that question. But these are the ways that Lendistry will look to verify your NAICS and NTE codes. If you're looking for your NAICS code on your taxes, either the 990 or any other, it is described, it says business code. On your taxes, it does not say enter your NAICS code here. It says business code. So I've had some people who didn't know where to find it. You want to look on where it lists business codes. If you have questions or have trouble finding that, shoot me an email. Okay, next. The eligibility requirements are not all or nothing. So the mere fact that you fall under one of the listed NAICS or NTE codes does not automatically make you eligible. You have to have at least that, but you also have to fit other criteria. Those are listed here. I encourage you to read them in detail. But the big things are that you have to charge tickets, some sort of entry fee. Your performers have to be paid. And at least 70% of your earned revenue has to come from money generated through your events, cover charges, ticket sales, production fees, production reimbursements, rental fees, and the sale of merchandise, food, and beverages at those events. So there are a couple variations on that in these descriptions, but that is the important thing. Big things, your events have to charge, and you got to pay your performers. As I mentioned in the first, if you are a nonprofit organization and you don't charge for your events, you can still be eligible, provided that, excuse me, provided that the staff of the not-for-profit is paid. So if you are a not-for-profit that has free events and everybody involved is a volunteer, both as performers and as the members of your organization, then you will not be eligible. But read those in more detail. Next. Then there's a list of ineligible businesses. The big thing here to point out, you should read all of them. But the big thing to point out is you have to have at least a 30% loss in earned revenue between 2019 and 2020 in those three magical quarters. So you're not looking at all of 2019 to 2020. You're looking at Q2, Q3, and Q4 of 2020, and the same Q2, 3Q, and Q4 of 2019. If you had a 29% revenue loss between those two, then you will not be eligible. You need to have at least a 30% loss. Okay. Move on, because there's lots of detail in the ineligible businesses that you should double check yourselves on. You have to be based in California. Yeah, the majority of your income has to be earned here, and you have to be up to date with all of the various state revenues. Next. The eligible use of funds. This is a COVID relief grant. So the funds have to be used for COVID related expenses. There's a lot of detail in here. Read it thoroughly. The thing to remember, unlike SVOG and unlike most grants that not-for-profits are used to, there is not a set time period for when these funds can be used. What is set is the ways that it can be used, and that if you have received other government funding and have allotted specific expenses to different sources of government funding, you cannot double dip. If your air conditioning bill in June of 2020 was covered by SFOG, you can't use that same expense for these funds. And you'll want to keep a record of all of that. The one other eligibility that I forgot that's a very important, there is no wiggle room on, as somebody just asked in the chat, you have to have been in business prior to June 1st of 2019. If you are not, you unfortunately are not eligible for this grant. If you started July 1, unfortunately, you are not eligible. And you have to have had income in June of 2019 so that you can have a comparative loss. If you had zero income in 2019, there's no way for you to have less, to have at least 30% loss from nothing. There was something else that just floated across my brain. For those of you who are not-for-profits and who might be on a fiscal year, for these quarterly calculations, you want to use your calendar year, do a calendar year P&L for 2019 and 2020. This is, again, because of the impact of COVID, we want to be looking at apples to apples. So if your fiscal year started in June, then your numbers would look very different when the impact of COVID would hit. So when you are providing your information, you're going to want to look at reporting on the calendar year, even if your taxes are based on a fiscal year. Next. Okay, required documents. When you go to fill out the application, they're going to want some specific documents from you. These are, first off, an applicant certification, which is a bunch of things that you attest to. This particular document you can find on the Cal Venues website, which I put a link to earlier. You're going to go down through the website, they show you samples of the documents, and then you'll find a place to download an application certification. There's one for for-profits and there's one for not-profits. Make sure you download the correct one. Business financials. These are your federal and state tax forms. In this case, if you're on a fiscal year, you still are going to submit your same tax forms. You need the entire tax form for both federal and state, and not just the first cover page. They're going to want the entire PDF of these returns. You're going to need a government issued ID. You're going to need interim financial statements. What this means is those Q2, Q3, and Q4 profit and loss statements for 2019, and the same thing for 2020. The last time, and I assume this is still true this time, what they want is for you to do a P&L for Q2 2019, do a separate P&L for Q3, a separate one for Q4, make the same 3 reports for 2020, and then put them all into a PDF. So they want all of 2019 or the 3 quarters of 2019 in one PDF, but they want it broken down so they can look at each quarter. As with everything else, you want to make it as easy as possible for the reviewers. If that's how they like to see the information, give it to them like that. We will discuss that point further later. And then you have to prove your official filing with the California Secretary of State. There are some different examples there. Basically, you are proving here, number one, that you are in good standing with the state, but also that you have been in operation since prior to June 1 of 2019. For nonprofits, you're going to want your IRS tax determination letter. And again, you're going to have to prove that you were in existence prior to June 1 of 2019. Just going to remind everybody, please put your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. That way we can go through all of them and make sure we don't miss anything. Next. Application certification. This is what we talked about a minute ago. What this is telling you is you can download it, sign it by hand, scan it into a PDF, or there are ways to do it online and sign it. Next. This is just taking you step by step how to complete that form. Next. Keep this handy for you once you download it. Keep going. Okay, these are examples of your tax returns. What it's telling you is you need federal and state for 2019 and 2020, the entire documents. They may be giant PDFs. You're going to want to make them small enough that they come under the 15 megabytes limit. Next. Keep going. Government ID. One of the big things that is true for these state grants is that Lendistry and Cal OSB have to do everything they can to prevent fraud. Part of that means they're verifying your ID. So be ready to provide your driver's license and or passport. Next. And these are copies of documents, keep going, that prove your existence. So as you're getting ready to gather that, these are you can look in here to make sure you're clear on what you need to provide. Next. Okay, this is what we've talked about before with the NAICS code. People get confused about this particular slide because it says review your NAICS code and to go to this website to review your NAICS code. Be very, very clear. You are not, for this process, going to go to this website and figure out what you think your NAICS code should be and then put that on your application. What goes on your application is the NAICS code that is on your 2019 or 2020 tax forms, or in the case of nonprofits, your NTE code as is listed in GuideStar. Again, if when you go there, you see something that you feel like doesn't represent what your organization does, then I would speak with your accountant and your legal counsel. And if you have any other questions on that, if you go there and you feel like there's a problem, you can email me and I can help you figure out what to do. Next. Use a valid email address when you are applying. For some reason, the system where the applications go in hates info@emails. So if that's the main email that you use for your organization, don't use it for this. Next. So this is just going to talk to you about how to prepare your documents. Read it. Again, my biggest advice is the person and or people that are reading these documents, you want them to help you. You want to make their job as easy as possible. Don't take a crappy picture of a document and submit that. If you're scanning, make sure things are straight and legible. Before you upload any PDF, open it and look at it and make sure it came through how you intended. You want it to be easy for these people to review and understand your documentation. You don't want to make their lives harder. Next. Okay. As I mentioned, as part of this process, they're going to verify the identity of the person submitting the application. One of the things to remember is the way this system is set up is with the assumption that it is the owner, or in the case of a nonprofit, say the executive director or board president, that is completing the application. There has to be a signer. So someone that is listed on your statement of information as an officer of the company has to be the signer for the grant. That is who they're going to want to identify in persona. That is also who will be asked questions and will need to verify their identity by phone at one point in the process. So if your organization is such that your signer is not the one that's going to sit down and complete the application, understand they are still going to have to be involved in the process, because this persona process will literally, you'll give them a picture through a PDF or a JPEG of your ID, and then they will need that person sitting in front of the computer with either the camera in your computer or the camera in your cell phone to verify that it's the same person. So if you're a not-for-profit and your board president is the signer, they're going to have to actually be there with you when you are submitting the application. I understand that this is an uncomfortable situation for many people to share this sort of personal information. It's going to ask for the signer's driver's license and address. And for a lot of people, that's quite uncomfortable. But what you have to understand is these are taxpayer dollars, and it is Lendistry's responsibility to make sure there is not fraud or scams going on. We all wish that we lived in a world where nobody would try to take advantage of a relief program. Sadly, that is not the world in which we live. Every one of these relief programs that has gone up, we have all heard about the cases of people creating businesses, creating false applications, and we all want to help make sure to avoid those headlines. Additional funds of this type will not come if there is rampant fraud. So understand, when you are dealing with the inconvenience of the persona process and trying to get the camera to recognize your face, it is inconvenient, but it is for a very important reason. Okay, next. These next few pages that is going to take you screen by screen to sort of let you know what the persona process will be. So you have your stuff ready and you understand as you're doing it. Keep going. Okay. So again, because this is a computer program set up to accommodate a whole lot of people. As with all computers, it has glitches and ways that make it happier. These are things that Lendistry has identified through the process. If you do them, your life is easier. Read these next few pages. They have great information here where they take you step by step through the things to do and how to do them. The big things are, you want to use Google Chrome. It likes that so much better than other browsers. Clear your cache, use incognito mode, and disable your pop-up blockers. The next few pages will take you line by line. Do these things. I cannot tell you how many people in the tech process I have dealt with who are having problems, and when you ask if they did these things, they said no. Do them. They're easy. Okay, keep going till we get, all right. So as I mentioned, there'll be an application period. Once that concludes, then the review of the applications will begin. It is a multi-stage process. You will get a confirmation when you first apply, and then you will get a confirmation or an email about the basic eligibility. There's certain things that they just go through with algorithms. Did you upload the documents? Did you say that you didn't have a loss? There are some automatic things. When you get the first one that says you've met if you get the first one that says you've met the minimum requirements, that does not mean you are getting the grant. What it means is you can move on to the next phase of review. They got your application, you put up all the documents, you can move on. There will then be some additional stages in the process that you have to move through. The final step, when you can say yay, is you'll get an email that says you have been awarded the grant, not that you've been selected for additional evaluation, but that you've been awarded the grant, and that they will be sending you documents through DocuSign. So know that you will get some additional communications. And again, there is no reason to rush to get your applications in this week. The application portal will be open until the end of January, and there is no difference whether you apply on January 30th or December 19th. Because that is not that's not how the grants will be prioritized. Next. Final tips. There are some kinks in the language because it's new for these state agencies to be dealing with both for-profit and not-for-profit. If you're not-for-profit and it says owner, just know that they're talking about the board president or the executive director, depending upon who is a signer. What it has to be is when you look at your statement of information, and this is for both for-profit and not-for-profit, look up your statement of information in the California Secretary of State and see who is listed there as an officer. And those can be your legal signers, not the person. If somebody is only available to receive service, your service agent, that is not an official signer. So you need to look in and see who are the officers and who are signers, because it has to be a signer that completes this. If you are completing it and the signer is someone who is not necessarily involved on a day-to-day basis because they're a board president or an owner, and that's not what they do, you want to make sure that the email and the cell phone number that you use are ones that are monitored all the time. So if you have a board president, for example, that tours the world and is gone 6 months of the year out of touch, you don't want to use their email or cell phone, because these are the two ways your communication will come. And if Lindustry tries to reach out to you and they don't hear back from you in certain periods of time, they will close your application and move on. So make sure, I can't say this strongly enough, that the cell phone number and the email that you use are ones that are monitored regularly. So when they have questions and they have issues, you can get back to them as promptly as possible. Again, it's your job to make their job easy. There are going to be some computer glitches. There are going to be questions, as I said, that feel personal. And we are having to find that place between our comfort zone as individuals and our concern about identity theft and the state's due diligence to make sure there isn't fraud. And it's not always an easy place to find. The other thing that will happen during the process, and I'm not sure at this point whether it is during this application process or it will be a follow-up, but in addition to confirming your identity through persona, Lindustry will also confirm your bank through a system called Plaid. Again, this makes people nervous because we're all concerned about identity theft, and it is very invasive. They will want your login information as well as your routing and account information. And this is for two reasons. One is because this is how the payments go out through electronic transfers. They don't cut checks. But the other thing they do is they use this process and this third-party secure provider to establish that, again, it's a fraud check, that it's an actual account. There are some banks that do not participate in Plaid. If yours doesn't, don't worry. There are other ways to verify you. And Lindustry will work with you. They'll have you provide bank statements and those kinds of things. But just be prepared and know there are going to be times in this process where it might be a little uncomfortable because of that push between you're wanting to protect your personal information and them wanting to verify. If you have questions and issues, you can email me, you can call the call center, etc. Okay, next. All right, so there's the call center phone number. Let's move on one more time. And there is all of our information, the Lindustry, the my email. So let's jump into the Q&A. What does a defined audience space? Does it have to be a fixed seating? It does not have to be a fixed seating as long as there is a clear definition. You know, you can clearly say, this is where the performer goes, and this is where the audience is. It can be a reconfigurable space in terms of audience. If you want to ask anything more specific on that, Amy, feel free to give me an email. We are a nonprofit organization producing free of charge shows in public parks. Artists, creators, and texts are all. Our venues therefore vary. Because we pay expenses through contributed income, does that amount? No. So in the first place, since you're a not-for-profit, it's fine that you do not charge for your shows. However, you are going to have to show income related to that, some form of income. Did you have something you wanted to add, Patrice? Okay, maybe not.
No, I was just going through because you were answering it live.
Okay, perfect. Oh, I see. All right. The gross earned revenue is your gross earned revenue. And if you have zero gross earned revenue, send me an email and let's talk about this specifically. That is the challenge for not-for-profits, that even though it says you don't have to charge for your shows, you still have to show gross earned revenue. So John, send me an email and let's talk through this. If applying as a nonprofit organization who is hosting a live event, does that event need to generate at least 70% of the earned revenue for the entire fiscal year? It needs, the short answer is yes. If you only have one event a year, then yes, that still needs to generate 70% of your earned revenue for the fiscal year. It doesn't have to present 70% of your total revenue, but it does have to present 70% of your earned revenue. If we got a CAA NPPA grant, are we ineligible? No, I don't know what CAA is, but NPPA is also administered by Cal OSBA and also administered by Lindustry, and they are two completely separate programs. So NPPA does not disqualify you from receiving Cal Veneus. Whose government ID needs to be included in the application? Not the grant writer, the signer. So whoever is a signer is who you would include their ID. So it matches the signer information. And that is who will have to complete the DocuSign at the end of the process. And that is who needs to be someone listed on your statement of information. I can almost guarantee you it would not be a grant writer. In some situations, it could be your managing director if they are a signer on the account. How are NTE codes updated in GuideStar? Shoot me an email and I will give you the information about contacting GuideStar. The guidelines list the following. Jeanette, I think you need to retry your question. Can you upload all of the application before going through the persona process? One of the things that we didn't receive, my answer is going to be no, but one of the things we have not yet received from Lindustry on this particular program is the sample application. So in the last two, both Cal Veneus 1 and the NPPA, the document upload was the very last thing in the process. So I would assume that would be the same here. We filled out round 1 of Cal Veneus, but never actually submitted. However, we got an thank you for applying when telling us the application was incomplete. Are we eligible in this round? Tony, send me an email and let me double check with them. Because I do know what they've categorically said is don't resubmit, but if you started the previous application but didn't ever submit it, then you probably are okay. So shoot me an email and let's clarify you. The guidelines list the following. I think, Jeanette, don't push return after you do your colon, because I think that's what the problem is. If we are a nonprofit with other programs that are not connected to our venue performing arts program, do we need to include those revenue streams in our total annual revenue number? If it is earned revenue, as opposed to contributed revenue, then yes, you do. Because what they're going to do is look at your earned revenue on your taxes. If you have other streams, but those are contributed revenue, then you don't. If you want to send me an email, we can walk through that in more detail. Oh, here we go. Is any of the following? Performers are paid in the amount. This is the second bulleted item listed in the following. I'm not sure what your question is, Jeanette. I see that you've copied the things in.
So Terry, I think she had a question earlier. I think what she's trying to clarify is whether they have to have 70% of their income come from performing arts related income. And as I was trying to advise, if you meet this second bulleted item, you also have to meet everything else. So you don't have to have the 70% coming from performance related income, but you have to be an independent venue and an independent live event as well. So you have to meet all of that.
I think, Jeanette, why don't you shoot me an email and let's talk through what your situation is, because it can get very confusing because in some cases you have to have everything, and in some cases, but then there's another setup where there's slightly different parameters. So why don't you shoot me an email and describe for me your organization, and let's make sure that you get the correct information. Are these grants taxable for California or the feds? Yes. You will receive a 1099, and for for-profit organizations, these are taxable income. Okay, I'm going to work backwards through the chat. If anybody has any other questions, hey, we got 8 minutes left. So keep putting your stuff into the Q&A. We have the same question about the 70. Yes, Rachel, email me so we can deal with the specifics. Is there support for nonprofits only? As a government entity who manages a theater, would we be eligible? You are not specifically ineligible because you're a government entity. The question becomes, Danielle, do you file an individual tax form for your theater? And do you, as that entity, meet the eligibility requirements? For example, if you're a theater that is run by a college and you don't file your own taxes, the university files taxes, well, then you're based on those finances and that you're a part of that overall, you're probably not going to meet the eligibility requirements because the college is probably not going to have the right NAICS code and these kinds of things. If you're a separate entity and you file your own 990, then it is more likely that you will be eligible. You began operations in the beginning of 2020. Duranda, I'm sorry, I may have mispronounced that. No, if you began operations in the beginning of 2020, you are not eligible. Do we need a SAM number to apply? No, SAM numbers are on the federal level. Are there any other that are hiding in here? And I want to make sure in the Q&A we didn't miss any where the answer was just, Patrice wants to answer this live. So if you are still here and you have a question that we have not answered, as opposed to those ones that I've told people to email me on, then go ahead and pop yourself into the Q&A. Because otherwise, I think we may have answered all the questions. And we have 6 minutes left. As I said before, let me pop all the links back into the chat for good measure. This is the Californians for the Arts. If you want to go show Californians for the Arts some love, on the Californians for the Arts website, there is a specific page dedicated to this program. You go on the website. It says programs. Under programs, it'll say Cal Veneus. That's where the webinars will be posted. That's where we'll post the slide deck, etc. This is the program website. This is where you will go when you're ready to submit your application. This is also where you can find FAQs and an additional copy of the application guideline. This slide deck that we showed today will be posted on the Californians for the Arts Venues Grant Program webpage. And last but not least, my happy email. Let's see. Do you need quarterly balance sheets as well as quarterly P&L? No, the P&L is what they're looking for. Danielle, I will absolutely tell Julie you said hello. You will receive, in terms of the taxability question, you will receive a 1099, but if you normally do not have to pay taxes on those sorts of funds, then you will not on this one. I'm not an accountant, your CPA, or your lawyer, so I don't want to tell you definitively. What I will say is for for-profits, they are definitely taxable, and Lauren, that you will receive a 1099, and the rest is between you and your accountant. Will there be more webinars like this? There will be, Anonymous. There is a schedule that is on the Californians for the Arts Cal Venues program website. The rest of them are all in January. We did these two early ones because we wanted to get information out, but we will resume them the first week in January. And sadly, I do not remember them off the top of my head. But there will be at least 4 more in January, remembering that you just need to submit before the portal closes. So I wouldn't wait to the 31st, but if you submitted one of those final days in January, you should be fine. You want to get your information as accurate as possible. So you want to get all your questions answered before you submit, but err on the side of submitting, err on the side of applying. If you apply and there are issues that we have to sort out after the 31st, that we can do. If you don't apply because you were waiting for the answer to a question or you weren't quite sure, once the door closes on the 31st, then there's no going back in. You can't then apply late. One of the big things for those of you who are not-for-profits to understand is, as opposed to a government grant or a foundation grant, this grant is based on legislation. And so the rules and regulations and eligibility, there is no wiggle room. There is no, as a private foundation, the foundation has the ability to say, well, we think these people are really deserving and they had a bad thing happen, and so they couldn't get their application in, and we can make an exception in this case. That is not an option here. Lindustry does not have that allowance to make any exceptions. They are, the legislators wrote a piece of legislation. It goes to Cal OSBA, and they work with their lawyers, et cetera, to determine, what that legislation means. They then hand over the responsibility to Lindustry, but at that point, Lindustry has no leeway. It's not a matter of they don't think you're deserving. It's not a matter of they don't think that you're a fabulous organization. It is they have a very strict list of eligibility requirements and what meets those eligibility requirements. And as we found out last year, in order to change that, it's about going back to the legislature. So don't think it's because they don't appreciate you or don't appreciate what you're doing. They simply don't have a great deal of leeway. I did apply last few months ago. Are we to repeat this process again? Okay, if you replied a few months ago, Yes, applied. I'm sorry. Godswell, McWilliams, Amugo. Then you didn't apply for this program. What you applied for probably was the NPPA. This program application process closed December 7th of 2021. So anything that you applied for after that is not, in fact, this program. Sorry about my dogs. If you are not sure, send me an email and we can look up your application. I apologize again for my dogs. I'm sorry, still confused about how nonprofits who host free events. Anonymous, please just email me. I realize it's confusing. That they say that you they have put in a parameter that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But send me an email directly and we'll try to sort it out for you. Do we need caliber? I think, again, we have covered everything. It is 2:01. I'm happy to stay for a few more minutes if people have questions. Thank you, everyone. Remember my email. Remember, Californians for the Arts is only here with the generosity of donations and memberships. One of the other great things about being a member of an organization like Californians for the Arts is that it's their job to keep their ear to the ground. And so when opportunities like this come up, you know, being on their mailing list, being a member helps you get that information. It also helps all of us by there being a group to advocate for these kinds of pieces of legislation and this funding. Thank you all. There are no more questions coming in, so I'm assuming that I will get a lot of fun individual emails. I hope you all have wonderful holidays, and this information will be emailed to you, the follow-up of the Q&As and stuff, and the links will all be up on the website. Thanks. Bye.